And if I'm not working at my best, I guarantee you're not living at your best either.
Hey, it's episode number 56 of the First Responder Wellness Podcast. My name is Conrad Weaver. I'm so glad you've decided to join us today. I am really excited about having Ryan Dedmon on the show today. It's been far too long. I should have had him on the show months ago, but here we are. Ryan is the Outreach Director and Resilience Instructor for the 911 Training Institute. He's become a good friend of mine, and he's actually hosted me at his house when I visited Southern California, so it's really a privilege and an honor for me to have Ryan on the show. He's really passionate about helping first responders deal with mental health issues, and he teaches this stuff. And I'm really excited about what he has to share today, and the information that he presents is really compelling, so be sure to listen to the entire episode. I think you'll get a lot out of it. Hey, if this show has helped you in any way, would you be so kind as to let me know? I would love to hear from you. Drop me a line on YouTube or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That would mean a lot. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Then invite your tribe to join in as well. We drop a new episode every Wednesday, so share the link if you find this content helpful and informative. Thanks again for being here, and now here's my conversation with Ryan Dedmon. Well, Ryan, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. It's about time, man.
It's not my fault. Conrad, I was thinking about that the other day too. Like, how long have I known you? When did we first meet?
Oh man, that's a good question. It's a while.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, so for the uninitiated, tell us who you are.
Well, my name is Ryan Dedmon, and I work as the Outreach Director for the 911 Training Institute. 911 Training Institute is a small private company that offers training and consulting services to public safety agencies, and mental health. All things related to mental health is what our subject matter expertise is. So things like stress, resilience, wellness, peer support, SISM, all that good stuff is what we love to focus on. I have the pleasure of working for Jim Marshall, who is our current CEO, who has been featured in your film. And we have contributed some selected material to your educational toolkit. So we have been strong supporters of your work over the last few years, Conrad, and all the great things that you're doing to help bring this kind of awareness to not just public safety, but then the greater public.
Sure. And I do appreciate that very much. You know, I consider you guys great friends, and the work that you guys are continuing to do in the 911 community is very important. And so kudos to you guys for doing that. And thank you for your support of the film and for just the extra content that people can have access to through when they purchase the PTSD 911 film and toolkit. They get access to some of your resources. So that's awesome.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit in a snapshot of how you got to where you are today.
Snapshot of how I got to where I am today. Okay. Well, I live in Southern California. I'm a retired police dispatcher. So I spent about almost 12 years working in local law enforcement in Southern California. For a very brief period early in my career, I was a police officer before I decided that's not for me. And then I ended in a communications center as a dispatcher. Most of my years of service were with the city of Anaheim, California. So I worked at the Anaheim Police Department. I retired in 2013. And through the course of my last 6 months or so, years of service at Anaheim, I experienced some really traumatic suicide calls that had just tragic outcomes. And those were really hard for me to process and deal with. And at the time, things like peer support and SISM were relatively new topics trying to be brought into public safety. And so I didn't have a lot of those extra resources that agencies have now. And so as a result, I was kind of left to my own demise, if you will. And in a moment of crisis, basically decided, I'm going to quit. And I voluntarily resigned overnight via email. It was a couple of months later where I was in a pretty dark place. I had started abusing alcohol significantly, and I was a raging alcoholic. And a mental health professional who I had the pleasure of knowing through my professional capacity at Anaheim PD, randomly and spontaneously reached out to me one day via email because she came across an article I wrote for a 911 publication on the internet. She read that article and she said, I'm thinking about Ryan. I'm going to reach out to him. And so she did. And she asked me how I was doing. And, I basically had a breakdown. I was like, I'm not doing well. I didn't have any, Conrad, I didn't have any specific suicidal ideations or thoughts, but my self-care had diminished significantly, that I was basically on a very self-destructive path that was just going to end in a dead end sooner or later. And then that's when she called and, I said, I'm not doing well. And then she asked me the really hard question. She said, you want to get some help? And I was like, I know the stigma, right?
Sure.
Especially, coming from law enforcement, 911, I know the stigma of mental health. I was like, I don't know. But what I do know is that I didn't want to be in that current state anymore. So I said, yeah, sure. Hit me with what you got. And she connected me with a trauma therapist who specialized in working with first responders who have been exposed to very traumatic events. And I had to go through months of counseling, like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is like the talk therapy. And then also months of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, EMDR therapy. Yeah, which is a specialized therapeutic technique that helps your brain reprocess trauma to which you have been exposed. And it probably took the better part of a year through counseling and therapy before I finally felt like I regained control of everything that was going on up here and in here again. And I kind of reclaimed my personal health at that point and decided I'm no longer going to be a victim, if you will, to the trauma I experienced, that I'm going to hit this back head on and take charge. And so I did. Through the course of that therapy, that's where I met Jim Marshall and found out some of the stuff he was doing in the 911 industry to raise awareness and bring education and training to 911 professionals, specifically at that time, about trauma and stress. And I was like, this is fascinating to me. One, because I have higher education in psychology, so I'm a little bit of a nerd. My master's is in forensic psychology. I'm not a licensed mental health professional or anything like that. I'm just a nerd. But I found it fascinating because I was like, I'd ask myself the question, I'm like, how come through the course of all of my years of service, did no one ever talk about dispatcher wellness or officer wellness? Because wellness for police officers at that point in time was, you got to make sure you're working out every day. You got to do push-ups, sit-ups, and run every day to stay in physical shape for top performance. And that is wellness. And no one ever talked about the mental health aspect of responding to tragic calls for service and the impacts that can have on your psyche and then your overall wellness, right? And so when I found out the work that Jim was doing, it's like, how can I be a part of this? How can I help support you in your work and efforts to train dispatchers? Because those were still my people, even though I was no longer working as one. And then ever since, for the last decade, Jim Marshall and the 911 Training Institute have not been able to get rid of me.
As much as they try, right?
As much as they try.
Well, and that's a good thing. So let me go back. Tell us a little bit about, and you don't have to go into details, but I'm just curious, were the things that affected you, caused you to pick up the bottle and drink, was it because of all the different calls, or was it one specific call? What was it? Was it the cumulative effect of it, or what was that exactly?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a mixture of both. So it was the cumulative effect, but specifically related to suicide. Mm-hmm. Early in my career, I lost a mentor at the police department to suicide. Mm. And I saw the impacts of that. Mm-hmm. And of course, that was in the very early 2000s. There was nothing being done at that point in time, wellness related, in the public safety community. We didn't talk about this stuff. We didn't have things like debriefings, peer support, CISM, like all of the things. It was kind of this old school emotional code of suck it up, mm-hmm. right? And these things happen in law enforcement, in public safety, and we must fight on and live another day, kind of thing. And so like, that's what I did early in my career. I didn't process the thoughts and feelings I had associated with how come this woman who was a cop's cop by all means, just salt of the earth cop's cop, like, why did she die by suicide? And I'm wrestling with this, but it didn't look like anyone else at the agency was. And so I thought, well, I can't be the one to raise my hand and ask some of these questions, because then I would look like the odd one out, right?
Sure. You're the weak one then, right?
Yeah. Like, no, that's not going to be me. So I just stuffed it, Conrad. And then, of course, years later, handling suicide calls from the public that were completed in such a similar form and fashion to the way she did it, even though it was years earlier, it like reawoke, it re-triggered all of those thoughts and feelings. And then I handled like, two at the end of my career that were so similar. I'm like, you know what? Like, I need a break from this. Like, I'm tired of talking to people on 911 who want to die by suicide. But of course, as a dispatcher wearing a headset sitting in a comm center, like, you don't know what's on the other end of that line when the phone is ringing. You don't have a way to like filter that out.
Sure.
It's not like you can answer a 911 call and find out that the caller is feeling suicidal and then me say, you know what, please hold. I'm going to get one of my coworkers on the phone to help you, who's better psychologically and emotionally equipped right now. I can't say that.
Sure.
And so it was this weird point I reached in my career where I was like, like, I had been doing this so long, so hard, so fast, so furious that like, I just wanted a break. Like, I wanted a break. But like, how do you give a dispatcher a break like that in a comm center, but still have them perform their duties and responsibilities? It's like being a police officer or an EMT, firefighter, paramedic saying like, I'll respond to some calls for service, but not these. It's like, you can't really do that, right?
Yeah, you can't pick and choose, right?
So
you're all in.
Yeah. And so I was like, man, I just want a break from this. But, the city human resources department told me that there were no other open positions as a civilian to which they could transfer me at the time. So my only option was basically short-term disability. And I said, well, I mean, short-term disability, like I was, 34 years old at the time, like short-term disability, like, what am I going to 34? I still have 30 years of my life left to work. What am I going to do on disability? And so then that's when I said, if that's your only option, I respectfully declined. And a couple of days later, I was like, you can take this job and shove it mentality. And I was like, sent the email and was still feeling all the things related to this last suicide call I handled. And that's kind of how it happened. So it wasn't really one specific incident, but it was more the category of how things were related to suicide. I've just been touched by suicide a lot in my life, unfortunately. And so that was kind of what brought me to the edge of my career where I made the decision that, I want to break and I'm not sure I want to do this anymore right now.
And we can talk about our friend, Nicole.
Ah, yes.
And her journey and her life mattered. And she didn't see it. She didn't see that her life was making an impact.
Yeah.
And for
So,
those who aren't initiated in our documentary film, PTSD 911, Nicole Ford was a dispatcher, and who, up and down in her journey, at times she was very well, and at other times she was not. And after her last dismissal from her work, she was in a dark place. And this was after the film came out. And she last August, a year ago, she ended her life. And it was a very tragic ending to an amazing life, amazing person who had so much to give and so much to offer. And just as we speak, this is a couple days before, we're in September, a couple days before September 21st, which is the date I'll be in Texas, where her name will be a part of a monument it's called the Heroes Monument, and for those who died by suicide. And so we'll be there with her family and honoring her memory and her life.
Excellent. Much love to the Ford family.
Yeah.
As they make that journey too, because I'm sure that will be a tough, very tough few days as we remember and celebrate. But what's weird is that, I feel like Nicole, though not with us anymore, is still working in some very creative ways.
Yeah, for sure.
That we could not have imagined.
For sure.
She's still giving back. So her legacy lives on.
Yeah. And as people see the film and they see her story, and they're inspired and motivated to get help and to, I hear reports of people who see the film and they're just, really inspired by that story. And I get to go share it, around the country. And that's just an incredible honor for me to do that, to share her story and the others in the film and their stories, and how their lives matter, and their lives still matter, and are impacting people and people making decisions. I had a fire chief, after seeing the film, he was like, man, I didn't think I had a problem until I saw your movie.
Yes.
And now he is doing huge things in his department. He's bringing in people to teach wellness and mental health to his people. He's starting a support group for first responders, and all because of the stories that he saw in the film. And that's the impact that stories like that have. And that's the impact that Nicole's life is having on people around the country.
I know Nicole always loved that, because in the last, I think, 2 years of her years of service, she was doing some traveling and speaking at a national level, publicly sharing her story, her experiences, and then, advocating for changes to be made to optimize organizational response to specifically dispatchers in this case, who have been exposed to serious trauma like she had been. And she always, I know she always found it so funny and fascinating when she would get done and people would come up to her afterwards. And it kind of felt like a Me Too movement where people are like, right, I saw you on screen, or I just heard you speak for an hour at this conference, and your story like touched me to my core, because in some ways, like, me too. And even though it's not the same story, everyone has their own. It's just the personal experience and identifying someone else who has walked a similar enough path, who can come alongside and support and then champion and advocate, is so powerful. And that's what your film does.
Yeah. So in your journey, what was it that kind of got you to get to a better place? You said you went to seek help. What were those processes that you went through, that you did, that may have been painful, may have been challenging, may have been difficult, to get you to a healthier spot?
Yeah, well, it was therapy. Plain and simple. It was therapy, which is funny, isn't it? Because when we talk about mental health, the stigma associated with that is unlike anything else in the greater field of healthcare. Because if you had some type of physical ailment or injury, you would be at the emergency room or on the phone with your family physician trying to make an appointment to help relieve whatever symptoms related to that ailment you were experiencing, right?
For sure.
But mental health it's almost just the opposite. It really is. It's just the opposite. And so I had that same stigma in my head, Conrad, and, which is funny too, because I had a master's in psychology, so I'm like, I should know up here like how this works.
Sure.
And yet still, I was very cautious and hands off, because I'm like, here I go. I'm going to walk into this person's office and they're going to have all the frames on the wall behind them, and they're going to be sitting behind this big oak desk, and the therapist is going to say, please lay on my couch over here and tell me where it all started. Oh, you didn't go to the circus when you were a child, right? This is what's playing out in my head, as silly as it sounds. But I'm like, and that's where you almost like talk yourself out of it, where you're like, okay, like this stuff is not going to work. This wazoo, kumbaya, fuzzy dovey, let's just hug one another, like stuff is not going to work. But it does. And so I remember the first person I saw was an MFT license, marriage and family therapist. And bless his heart, he was probably amazing at his job. But when I strolled in and said, yeah, I'm a former first responder, and like, here's some of the suicide stuff I'm wrestling with, I could kind of even see as a clinician the deer in headlights look on his face, because he was not used to that. He was used to couples coming in and let me help you improve your marital dating relationship at home, right? I'm a couples therapist, marriage and family therapist. He was not culturally competent, what we call, in working with first responders who've been exposed to serious trauma. And so even that then was another thing that almost discouraged me from continuing to reach out, because I'm like, these guys, like, you can have education, training, licenses up the wazoo, but that doesn't mean you're going to get it. And if you don't get it, like, why am I sitting in your office? What are we doing here? Like, this isn't going to change anything. This isn't going to help. And if that's the case, then I'm just wasting my time and I'm better off at home with the bottle. But the game changer is finding a mental health professional who has that cultural competency in working with first responders, so that when you walk in, you don't really have to explain, the significant impacts of showing up on scene at a fatal traffic collision, because that mental health professional has worked with other clients and patients who have been exposed to similar types of trauma. And so I remember the therapist I work with, I walked into her office and I'm like, okay, round 2, here we go. And of course, her first question was, tell me what brings you in here today. And I almost laughed, because I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, here we go again. Where do you want me to start, doc? And she says, well, at the beginning. So I go through the same, 2 to 3 minute spiel I just did with you, right? Like, oh, I had a mentor years ago. She died by suicide. Then I handled some crazy suicide calls and they were bad. And now what brings me here to you is that I've basically become a raging alcoholic and all I do is drink. And her response to that was, well, of course you have. And as soon as she said that, I don't know, but the power in those words of validation, I was like, because she was one of the first people that said that, because everyone else was like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be drinking. You need help. You should go see. You should do this. You should do that. We're worried because this is bad. This is bad. No one ever really said, like, yeah, like, of course. Like, it makes sense, right? Like, that's normal. That's a normal.
What did that do for you in that moment?
And that's what it was. Like, it was the powerful validation of that made me feel like, wow, like she gets it. Like, she gets it. And that is what established the foundation of our relationship in working together, because now I trusted her. I'm like, okay, she's not going to judge me for feeling like I'm trying to shoot whiskey to make the voices in my head go away. Like I don't have to explain all of that. She gets it, and she's not going to judge me for it. She wants to help me get better. And that's what established our relationship and working together over the course of those next several months through therapy. And then it was really not just the talk therapy and talking this stuff out, because I hadn't talked it out. Yeah. I mean, at this point in my life, like, I had resigned. I had left the agency, so they don't really have any more of a vested interest in me as an employee. And I don't come from a family of first responders. So I'm like, well, I talk to my family about this kind of stuff. That would just kind of blow their worldview apart.
Sure.
And so, like, I wasn't talking to anyone about this. And so that talk therapy helped open the floodgates of really examining the thoughts and emotions I was having. And then the EMDR therapy is what helped me change my perspective of it, because I was still experiencing, at that point in time, I was still experiencing almost, I guess, what you could describe as a relived experience of that trauma, because I would replay the phone calls over and over again in my head, and I could hear the voices of the callers, and I would repeat everything that they said verbatim, because it's like it was stuck, on just this loop, endless loop, and I couldn't break it, which is what I was trying to use the alcohol for. And EMDR therapy is what helped my brain remember that trauma, but from a different perspective, and reprocess it and kind of file it away as a memory. So now I can talk about those events now openly, but not feel the strong emotional or psychological response anymore. I kind of just remember it as a memory, no different than, winning a perfect attendance award in second grade. Like, I remember, but I don't feel all of the anxiety and depression and rage and guilt and shame that I did prior.
Is it that you can kind of now look at it more objectively as an event that happened?
Yeah.
I had someone once tell me that they went through EMDR. This was a state trooper in a state in the Midwest. And he said that, before EMDR, he had all these traumas he was carrying around in a satchel.
Yes.
And he'd pull one out and look at it, and it would just trigger him, and he'd go off and do whatever things that he would do to try to hide that memory. After EMDR, he said, I still have all the traumas in my satchel. They're all there in my memory bank. But now I pull them out and look at it, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that happened. And I can stick it back in there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mess him up, doesn't mess up his life.
Right.
Is that kind of what your experience is?
Yeah, it's weird, because that whole backpack satchel analogy illustration that people use all the time, right? Like, you're just carrying around a load of bricks. What's weird is that I think you become so accustomed, numb, and desensitized to it that you almost don't even realize that you're carrying around a load of bricks. Yeah. And EMDR therapy helped me set the backpack down on the ground to rest. And it wasn't until I did that I realized, holy smokes, how long have I been carrying this backpack? Like, with all this stuff in it, right? And it's not to say that you forget it or it doesn't matter, because it happened. And it happened, and it helps formulate the likeness of the person that you are today, right? You are who you are today because of everything that's happened in your life.
I have to kind of compare it to my coast to coast bike ride last summer. We loaded up our bikes with all of our stuff, tents and back and all the water and food and extra clothes and, cold weather clothes and all this stuff. We added, 40, 50 pounds of weight to the bicycle. And man, and once we're, 20 days in, we forget we have all this weight. I mean, we were finely tuned machine. Now we're pedaling. We're still carrying all this weight. But then I get home and I want to go on a bike ride, and I have thrown off all this stuff. And I'm like, I forgot the bike was this light.
Yeah.
I can go a lot faster and I can go a lot farther without all this weight.
Yeah. It feels like such an elementary illustration, but it so perfectly captures the pictures of how it feels going through that therapy. But I think the challenge in public safety is that I think traditionally public safety agencies, law enforcement, fire, EMS, 911, corrections, the traditional attitude and mindset of that culture is you will not set the backpack down because that, like you said, that means you're weak. And that is not something we tolerate in public safety. And so that is, some of the power of those therapeutic processes is because it teaches you how to set the backpack down, and then it affirms you in the belief that, man, it's okay. Like it's okay to, stop and rest on your trek up Half Dome at Yosemite. Right?
Yeah. That really makes sense, because I remember there's a hill here just west of me here in the mountains, the Catoctin Mountains. And it's one of those hills that when I'm really feeling it, I'm going to give it a tackle. It's like a 4-mile climb and it gets really steep. I mean, for those who are in the cycling world, it's probably a 15% grade, at a certain point. And I've done it already without stopping, and it feels great. And it always feels like if I stop halfway up, I'm a loser.
Yes.
But I'm not. I'm just giving myself a break. In fact, in the book I'm writing, I have a whole chapter on giving yourself a break. In our coast to coast bike ride, we stopped every 10 days or so and took a day off, because that then gave us the energy to tackle the next day and the next 10 days. And I think sometimes in the first responder community, putting down the thing that you're called to do and taking a break isn't a sin. It isn't something that's wrong or terrible. It doesn't make you less than, right?
Exactly. It's not meant to minimize your contributions to that.
Right.
If you're a paramedic and you're on day 10 of your tour, you need a day off, buddy. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
And we can talk about all of the operational challenges public safety agencies experience with things like staffing now and mandated overtime, and I'm being forced or called in, emergency call out. Trust me, I've been there, done that. We all understand it. But you got to ask yourself the hard question. Am I working at my best now? If I'm burning the candle at both ends like this? And if I'm not working at my best, I guarantee you're not living at your best either. So things like home life are going to diminish as well.
How important is it for you now, and how important was it for you then to have connections outside of 911, to have connections outside of your job?
Oh, night and day contrast. Back then, when I was working in public safety, I think an overwhelming majority of my friends were also public safety professionals. They were also first responders in some form or fashion, right? And I think that's because a couple of reasons. One, at the beginning of your career in public safety, no matter the field, I think they champion to create this identity in you, right? Like, I am now working as this, so now I will eat, breathe this. And that becomes such an integral part of your personal identity that somewhere along the way, you lose the personal aspect because your professional identity has become all consuming. And that's what happened to me. Like I would, all of my friends were either cops or dispatchers. That's who I hung out with. And partly because, when you go out and you hang out, we can kind of talk shop.
And you understand each other, right?
All peer support, but right. So I didn't have friends who were kindergarten teachers or electricians or auto mechanics or anything like that. Now I've almost reverted that. And I have a wide range. I certainly still have friends, loved ones in public safety, but I also have friends and loved ones who are not. And the reason for that is because I want those normal friends. I call them normal. I want those normal friends working in jobs outside of public safety to remind me that the world is not such a bad place. Because I think we unintentionally create this attitude and mindset that it's just always an apocalyptic doomsday in public safety because we are always responding to things that are going wrong.
Right.
And we forget that that's actually a very small percentage of the overall human population. It's just that that's the only human population that we're accustomed to interacting with. And so then we create this narrative in our head from a law enforcement perspective that everyone out there is a parolee at large looking to hurt and victimize other innocent people. From an EMS perspective, right? Like everyone out there is a patient who is abusing the emergency response system. And that's just not the case. And so I think those normal friends in my life remind me that, there are people in life who are very strong supporters of public safety outside of the national media attention that spotlights things like, defund the police. And so when that's all you see in media and that's all you deal with through your official duties and capacities as a law enforcement professional, then you feel like this is it. And so then, of course, who do I want to hang out with? Well, I want to hang out with my own. But the fact of the matter is that that's just not true. It's an inaccuracy. And then, our minds just kind of spiral and run with it. And then it changes our attitudes and mindsets. And so I like to have people in my life to make me more well-rounded because I want to sit down with the friend who's the kindergarten teacher and I want to hear about 5-year-olds running amok all day instead of, fatal overdoses.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like, we won't get into politics, but it's kind of like certain family members I have that their TV only works on one channel.
Yes.
and you know what I'm talking about. And all they can think about is that one viewpoint.
Yes.
Because that's all they know.
Yes. Perfect.
And if you don't expose yourself to other viewpoints, you think, the world is this way. And I remember when I was doing ride-alongs for my previous film, Heroin Script, it didn't take too many 6-hour ride-alongs to begin to think, oh, that's a dirty car. That guy there, he's riding dirt. It didn't take too long for me to begin thinking that way. So I can't even imagine if you're in this every day and all you see is you're responding to the bad guys or you're responding to, people abusing the medical system. I can't imagine what that mindset must do to you.
Yeah. And this is something that we in public safety, regardless of the respective field, but we need to change early on for people who enter these careers, because we have to remind them that at the end of the day, this is just a job. It's a calling. Don't get me wrong. It's a calling that not everyone can answer. And it takes a very special person to answer that call to serve in public safety as a first responder. But at the end of the day, it's just a job that gives you a paycheck to support you, your lifestyle, and your loved ones. And the reason that's important to remember is that if first responders allow that professional identity to become all-consuming, what then are you going to do when you have to look in the mirror and you're no longer a first responder? Whether that be voluntarily through retirement because you aged out, or even in some cases like Nicole, right, where she was involuntarily basically forced to resign because of whatever the reason, and that doesn't matter. But now you're no longer working as a first responder. And if that's all you know and that's all you believe and live by, then I think you're missing so much of life. And it's got to be, I would imagine, it's got to be no different than you as a film director, right?
Of course.
Because you are a film director. That is your job, one of your jobs, but that's not who you are.
Right.
So if I ask you the question, who is Conrad, or any first responder, when you look in the mirror and ask yourself that question, you are not your job. And because so many first responders so much embrace that professional identity, I think there is a lot of fallout when they have to wrestle with the fact that they are no longer so for whatever reason. And that also has huge implications on your health, on your overall health and wellness, right?
Sure. I love hearing stories of when someone in law enforcement or a firefighter or somebody in dispatch, where they have a side hustle. They have another thing that they do that's they're really passionate about that. They go over here to pay the bills and they run calls and they answer the phones and they all do things over there as their day job, but they have a side hustle that they're growing. I mean, that's fun. That's exciting. That tells me that they're in probably a little healthier place than others. If they can do something over here, maybe it's related, maybe they're, I don't know, maybe they're making the little coins, or they're selling those, or they're making patches, or they're, doing something related, but it's a side hustle. It takes them away from their day-to-day thing. And and I think that is a healthy place, unless you're just like overworking yourself and you're exhausted.
No. See that, and that's perfect, because that is the example, right? So that's what we call hobbies. You have a hobby, side hustle, you have a hobby. Well, hobbies are the things in life that once upon a time used to bring you a lot of joy. But as a first responder, you don't do them anymore. And the reason you don't do them anymore, wow, I'm tired of hearing those excuses. Well, I work too much. I'm always working overtime. I don't ever get time off. I'm like, you're telling me that you don't ever have the personal time off to go out and do the thing that used to bring you so much joy? Like, there's something wrong with that. The other reason that we don't do them is because the attitude and mindset of the culture again, right? Give you an example. When I was a kid, I used to be one of those people. You'll appreciate this as a film director. When I was a kid in the 90s, I used to be one of those people that would go to a movie theater and movie hop. I can neither confirm nor deny that I may or may not have ever publicly disclosed this, but I would movie hop, right? So that's where you pay to go into the theater to see one movie, but then when that showing is over, you hop over to another theater without exiting to go pay. Yeah. So I was, defrauding the establishment, but I would movie hop because I love movies, Conrad. But
reparations, man. You got to pay some reparations here.
I totally do. I owe so much. But somewhere along the way, I stopped doing that. And I realized today the reason I stopped doing that at the time is because after working in law enforcement, I know that people dress up in full body armor and walk into a movie theater filled with people with an assault weapon to randomly spray fire and kill people. Ask Aurora, Colorado.
Yeah, right.
Used to be one of those people, love to go out to the nightclub to get my dance on. Don't want to do that anymore. Ask Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. And used to be one of those people that like to go to a country music concert. And now you can't even do that anymore. Ask the 58 souls who lost their lives on October 1st, 2017 at the Route 91 harvest shooting in Las Vegas, Nevada. And when you work in public safety as a first responder and you experience those kinds of traumatic calls and you respond to those kinds of traumatic calls, I think that's what changes the narrative in your head, because now you're like, I can't do that stuff anymore because I don't want to be a victim of circumstance like these people were. And that's like, for all your law enforcement professionals tuning in, that's where you're out on patrol on the beat and you drive by that park and you think in your head, you're like, I would never let my children play in that park. Why? Because the kind of calls for service you have to respond to that happen in that park. And so there are things that start to inform your lifestyle. But what we don't realize is that some of that, I think, is an inaccuracy. And when you look at, say, mass data, we're going to realize that, calls for service happening at that public park are a very small percentage in comparison to the greater things happening in our communities. And yet we're allowing that to create these lifestyle changes so that we don't do the things that we used to love doing.
So how do you get past that?
I think that's one of the first ways, like you talked about, is kind of like having first those normal friends, if you will, who remind you that like it's not always a zombie apocalypse outside, and it's okay. And then having those hobbies in your life to do the things that used to bring you a lot of joy, satisfaction, fulfillment, the things you used to love doing, but somewhere along the way you gave them up. And I challenge you not to use the excuse of working as a first responder in the reasons by which you decided to give up the things you used to love doing.
And how many first responders I know I've talked to a lot who have said that they just work so they don't have to think.
Yeah. It becomes systematic, automatic, if you will, right? Almost mechanical in nature, where you sleep, wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, wake up, go to work. And certainly I can attest to me, there is some degree of comfort in that routine, if you will. But my overall health and wellness is significantly diminished when I'm using my job as a form of, occupational therapy. What do you do in life to keep yourself busy so that you don't have to think about all the things and feel all the feels? I'll go to work. I'll go to work where I get to deal with other people's problems and respond to other people's problems and fix their problems and not have to introspectively wrestle, process, and deal with my own.
What was the challenges that you faced when you put the headset down and went into, quote, real life or another life? What was that challenge for you? Did you longingly look back at the thin gold line family, or did you put it in your rearview mirror?
No, it was a real hardship for me. And I think that's because I was one of those people who mistakenly over-invested in my professional identity, that when I no longer had that, I didn't know who I was. So many people in my life knew me as a public safety dispatcher. And so many friends I had who still worked in the field knew me as Ryan from that specific agency. And when I no longer had that, I didn't have a good grip on my personal identity. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I liked doing anymore. I didn't know, because I was only the dispatcher who worked. And I think, if I might be so bold, I think that is one of the things that our friend Nicole really wrestled with at the end of her life.
Sure.
Because she was no longer a dispatcher, and she wanted to be so bad. She felt like that was, she had found her life's calling, and she was so good at it. And she had gone so far above and beyond in contributing lots of things to the 911 industry nationwide to better help 911 professionals across the country. She was so invested. And when she didn't have that anymore, I think in some ways she wrestled with finding her identity as a person, because, stocking shelves at a grocery store is not the same as being a first responder and responding to emergencies and helping other people in their moment of crisis. And I think that is one of the things that kind of sets a lot of first responders apart, is because they feel like that is their calling, right? And when you feel like that's your calling and then you can no longer do it, it's coming to grips to embrace your personal identity, because you're no longer, police officer Joe. You're no longer firefighter Sam. Now you're just Joe and Sam. You're two dudes hanging out at Starbucks enjoying a cup of coffee together. And I think first responders need to do a better job of recognizing that earlier in their career. And it's not to say, right, that we're not trying to champion for them in excelling in their career. It's just that we want to remind them that, hey, your job, your occupation is one small slice of the greater pie that is this thing we call life. And we want you to enjoy this slice, but man, don't forget about like all these other slices you have in your life. You know, right? People, things, places, all the other things. And I think we unintentionally forget about those things in fields of public safety because we just get wrapped up in the moments herein. And then before you know it, months have gone by, years have gone by. You're 5, you're 10 years into your career. And you're like, what happened to the person that started 10 years ago? Because I'm no longer that person. Somewhere along the way of this journey, things have changed, significantly changed for me. And it takes a very introspective person to be able to examine, the thoughts and feelings and process all those things related to the calls for service you respond to and the trauma that you see, to then make better, well-informed lifestyle changes in your life that help optimize your health and wellness. And I think if public safety agencies do a better job of front loading first responders at the beginning of their career to remind them of this path, it will help them navigate it in real time instead of reactively asking those questions now 10 years later.
So a couple questions to kind of start as we start to wrap this up. In your process of healing and getting yourself to a better place, was part of your journey, and probably still is, reaching back to help the next person up? And how did that impact you?
Yeah. That's a great question, Conrad. And that is very hard for me to put into words. That's one of the things that really drew me to Jim Marshall as a person and the work he was doing to help 911 professionals. Because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I entered into the private sector of public safety. But I just knew that I didn't want anyone else to feel or experience the same things that I did in the same form or fashion. I didn't want anyone else to feel like they were alone. I didn't want anyone else to feel like there was no hope, there was no solutions, there was no education, training, or resources that could help with all this stuff. And that is one of the things that really drew me to Jim. And then as my work progressed with him, and then as I've been presented the opportunities to do lots of training classes and speaking engagements at conferences and things like that across the country for first responders, at the end of the day, I don't like to be a person in the spotlight, which is kind of strange because a lot of the work that I do forces me to do such. But I'm one of the most introverted people on the planet. So even doing things like this is real work and a stretch for me, right? Because I hate the spotlight. I hate being on stage in front of people saying the things. I don't particularly enjoy that. But the ends justify the means. Because just like Nicole experienced, when I get done speaking at whatever type of conference or event, and if just one person comes up to me afterwards and says, hey, you know what? Me too. What do I do? How can you help? That eternal reward pays so much more dividends than anything else I have ever experienced in life. And it is hopefully that small ripple effect of just touching other first responders and letting them know that, there are trainings and resources and things that can help alleviate the trauma that you are suffering from. Let me get you plugged in or connected to whatever. And then hearing their journey of healing in the same or in similar ways that I experienced is really what drives me to keep going, because that is what I enjoy. Because I want, Dr. Jenka, who is our new president at the 911 Training Institute, has this most extraordinary saying that I love and that I'm going to steal. But like, we want first responders to feel like they leave their job on their terms at points in time of their choosing, when they feel is right, under the circumstances that they want. No longer because they kind of felt like I did, where it's a moment of crisis and like, I don't know what to do, but I don't want to do this anymore. And no one could possibly understand. There is nothing out there that could help. So forget it. We want people to feel like they are empowered with all of the information and resources to make that decision that is right for them when it is right for them. And helping people helping first responders on their own personal journeys make that decision to stay or go, doesn't matter. But that's what I find most fulfilling now.
That's awesome. And so you're in the private sector, you have a day job, and you have a side hustle working for the 911 Training Institute. That's kind of also a day job in a way. You're a busy guy. You're traveling a lot. You're around the country. I see you, everywhere. What do you do to take care of you now?
Oh, great question, Conrad. Okay, so I will share this. When I finished my therapy years ago in like 2014, been 10 years, I left it. I quit as a first responder and I had to go through therapy. I got to a point where I feel like, okay, like I am healed from this. I still remember it, and I still have the emotional and psychological scars, if you will, from it, but they're just scars, no different than a scar on my arm from, a trip and fall. I'm healed from this. And so I didn't continue in therapy because, thankfully my therapist also had a high degree of ethical behavior where she's like, I kind of feel like you're in a really good place. I don't want to take advantage of you still coming here when I don't know if you need it. So I made the decision at that time, like, you know what, like I got you on speed dial, call you when I need you kind of thing. And then of course, before you know it, 10 years went by, but it was last year. It was last year when in August, when you and I, learned that Nicole died by suicide. And ironically enough, she and I had some conversations, weeks prior to her death about just that. Because we found it, her words, not mine. She found it funny and ironic that I would go around the country doing speaking engagements at conferences or teaching training classes for first responders. And I would tell them that these are all the things that they need to do, but I wasn't doing it anymore. And it was kind of it was a wow moment when she shared that with me, because I thought, you know what? Wow, Nicole, like, actually, like, you're right. It's kind of like a do as I say, don't do as I do attitude. And I can see how that would come across. And even though I had done the things in my past, if I wasn't still doing them for myself, like, who was I to stand up in front of all these people and tell them that that's what they needed to do? And then, of course, when she died, I realized that, I need more help. And so I went back to therapy. And so currently I still see a therapist once a month now as a form of a check-in. And I'm very vocal and open and transparent about sharing that because I want to help break that stigma, right? How come me going to see my therapist is any different than, you going to see your family doctor for an annual physical because we're both men over 40 and we need that in our lives, right? We need to have our blood pressure checked and our cholesterol checked. And if I told you that I saw my doctor, to try and help get something like that in check as a measure of proactive treatment, you would applaud me for that.
Sure.
But yet, if I tell you I'm going to see a counselor or a mental health professional for therapy once a month,
what's wrong
somehow
with you?
There's some type of stigma associated with that. I'm like, this makes no sense. So we need to change this narrative,
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
But like, the illustration I absolutely love is not just physical health too, but like also your car, because most of us have one of those in lives. What do you do to your car every 3,000 miles? You change the oil in it.
Yep.
Why? Because that's what the auto manufacturer recommends in the 500-page manual that comes with your car. We don't know why. We do what they say. And if you don't change your oil at 3,000 miles, what happens to your car? Well, at some point in time, it's going to blow up and you're going to end up on the side of the highway trying to make an emergency call to AAA to have them send a guy out to rescue you. And that is what CISM and peer support do in public safety. But I want to try to encourage first responders that, like, if you would have changed the oil at 3,000 miles like you should have, would you still have ended up on the side of the highway? And if the answer is no, then I think you have to start asking yourself some hard questions about your occupational and lifestyle choices, because you need to reassess what is most important to you. Because if there are things you can change in your life to do your oil change, if you will, then do it. Why wouldn't you? Why are you going to blow your engine up when there are things you can do from a preventative care standpoint that doesn't help? It prevents you from ending up in that tough spot. And so those are the things I do in my life. I, particularly see a therapist once a month. I'm very good about work-life balance now, which means when I get done with my day job, I clock that out. And I don't even think about it until I wake up and have to clock in the next day. My side hustle, I do that because I enjoy it, but I also have boundaries on that too, because I no longer want to be the person that works 16 hours a day. Look, I'm too old for that, right? So I have those boundaries set in my life where I'm no longer just a yes man, because I realize that my own health and wellness need this for me as a person. And if I need it as a person, guess what? I also need it for my employer as their employee, because am I working at my best if I don't have those boundaries? And so I think it's encouraging first responders to do a self-assessment of establishing those boundaries in their lives, to make sure that, right, you're doing the side hustles and the hobbies, the things that used to bring you joy. You're doing those things. You're going to those places and you're spending time with the people in your life, friends, families, and loved ones, the people you cherish spending time with. And we need to stop enabling first responders by using the excuse that, work takes priority because you're a first responder and they need you because it's some type of public safety apocalypse that's happening that requires all hands on deck. Don't get me wrong. I've been there, done that. And sometimes that is true. But there's also times where you have to say no. Like, I can't today because my kid's got a dance recital. I can't today because it's my day off and I have plans. I can't today. I can't today because sometimes I just need a mental health day because I'm feeling compassion fatigue and I'm feeling a little burnt out, and I need to find a way to recharge my battery so that I come back at my best. So that's what I encourage first responders and then even all your listeners to do.
Yeah. Well, I applaud that. And I have to say no to something for tonight. I volunteer at my church as a sound engineer, and I'm on a couple times a month sometimes, and they had a training tonight. Well, yesterday I got back from the West Coast, 2 a.m. I finally walked into the house. So I'm home. I was home last night with my wife. Today I'm here working. I'm doing this podcast. I have a couple podcast interviews. I have one coming up that I'll be on someone's show, which is exciting. And then I was going to be going away tonight for a training for the sound engineering thing. And then tomorrow I leave for Texas. And so I was just like, I only see my wife one night. No, I'm saying no. So I had to text our team leader and say, I will not be attending the training tonight. Catch me next time.
Yes.
And it felt so good. It felt so good. You know, a little guilty because, you know, all the other, you know, techs are going to be there. But now I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And, you know, I can catch it next time. And yeah, I'm not going to get kicked off the team for missing one training thing. And I have a little bit less stress in my life, and I get to hang out with my wife.
Good for you. Well, I'm proud of you for making that decision. And also thank you to your wife for not canceling this interview in this podcast episode, because that would have made me sad.
Well, you know, we could get into another conversation about her and her job and the stress that she has, but we'll leave that for another podcast. But I want to ask you one final question, actually two final questions. One, what are you doing this weekend to take care of you?
What am I doing this weekend to take care of me? Right now, I don't have any plans. So that's actually a good thing. Mm-hmm. Partly because I recharge a lot in isolation. I love, as much as I love people as an introvert, I also need some solitary time to recharge my social battery. Mm-hmm. So not going out and staying at home and being a gremlin and watching all the shows like the PTSD 911 documentary
available on Amazon
on TV, right? That's what helped recharges my battery. Yeah. But then two, it's also a little bit of an exercise for me because I'm also, as a first responder, I have a very strong type A personality. I'm very regimented and slightly OCD. So I like to have things organized and regimented and scheduled. So to have an open schedule where I don't have plans, or I'm going to be doing, or a checklist of things I'm going to specifically do today, is a little bit of a learning exercise for me in embracing the freedom of that and not feeling like I always have to have this set schedule for me to evaluate my performance. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm trying to do this weekend.
Awesome. That's great. So finally, a final question. What are some resources? What are some things that people that you would recommend for them to go to? Obviously the 911 Training Institute, but what are some other things, including that you would recommend to help people get to a better place in their career as a first responder?
Yeah, there are a lot of organizations, membership, nonprofit or otherwise, in fields of public safety that are doing some extraordinary things, I think, nationwide to try and improve things like first responder wellness in general. So the idea years ago that, there was just no one out there who could possibly understand and there were no resources, like that's just not true anymore today. Mm-hmm. All you do is ask Google now. And so, without advocating for one specific one, I think it's just important to know that there are so many resources available to help. And when I say help, that doesn't mean like you're on the brink at the edge of the cliff feeling like you're in a moment of crisis. That is doing even things like, for me, as a point where you're like, I feel like I'm good and I'm taking good care of myself, but I want to do a better job. And how can I do some things for preventative care? Mm-hmm. There's so much information and resources. We have some of those listed on the website for the 911 Training Institute. So if you go to 911training.net, there is a page on our website that lists and then hyperlinks to some of those organizations and resources that I would encourage first responders to check out at their convenience, and also family members, right? Because maybe you're not a first responder listening to this podcast. Maybe you're a friend or a family member of a first responder. And if you feel like you are starting to see some red flag warning signs in behavior that indicates diminished self-care in your friend, family member, loved one, just know that you too can find these resources and then help connect that person as well. So there's just so much. It's a gold mine, really. Certainly are places that do it really well, and there are other places that leaves room for improvement, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just encourage you to ask the hard questions in vetting those resources, because at the end of the day, I want a first responder to connect with a resource they feel is right for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that might not be the same one that would be right for me. Mm-hmm. And guess what? That's okay. So I want, them to ask the hard questions in vetting that resource to make sure that it is a good fit for what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Ryan, this has been an amazing conversation. We could probably talk for hours, but I know you and I both have to get to other things. Mm-hmm. So I do appreciate your time, appreciate you as a friend and as a first responder colleague of sorts and helping first responders. Thank you for taking me into your first responder family.
It's always my honor and pleasure to spend time with you, sir. And if I can do a shameless plug for your film,
by all means,
because of the powerful impacts that your documentary has had, not just on me as a former old retired now first responder, but for first responders still currently serving and all of their friends and family members who care about their health and wellness. You have to check out the PTSD 911 film, and you have to watch it for yourself. And you have to find a way to use the stories that you see depicted in that film and then translate it into the narrative of your own story and find ways to then optimize your own health and wellness.
Thank you. Thank you for that endorsement, and thank you for your time and for all the work you're doing. I really appreciate you.
Yes, sir. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate your insights. Really loved having this conversation with you, and I can't wait to have another one in the very near future, hopefully in person. Hey, if you want to learn more about the 911 Training Institute, I've put a link in the show notes, so please check out their work. And thank you for listening or watching this show. And just a reminder that I'm here every Wednesday with a brand new podcast episode, so be sure to tune in next week. And remember, you are not alone. And if you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.